Hey everyone, we're starting a few minutes early. This is Shinju with Dystopia Labs. I have Cameron here from Bath as well as Fluffypony from Tari. We just wanted to thank all of our co-organizers for helping us put the summit together. So Zcash, Zcoin, Starkware, O1 Labs, now Mina Protocol, Bath, and Secret Network. Cameron, do you want to intro some of our community partners and just thank them
Absolutely.
for all the help?
Yes. But first, I got to thank you first, Shinju. This has been an amazing couple of days of conferences. If you haven't checked it out, check out the conferences from yesterday. They're great. But besides that, thank you to the blockchain clubs at UCLA, National University of Singapore, UCSB, Davis, Michigan, Miami, Dallas, Tsinghua University, Rochester Institute of Technology, the Corella Blockchain Institute, the Midwestern Blockchain Consortium, and all the other ones who helped put this together, or not put this together, but market it out to people and ensure that it's going to be a super huge success. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we've listed all of our community partners on Twitter and also on the cover of this event. So feel free to look at it and check out their sites. They have been creating really great content. So without further ado, we are ready to transition to our first talk. Ricardo, are you ready?
I mean, I could be.
All right, so our first talk is on privacy enhancing currencies and supply auditability, and I'll let you take it from here. Would you mind introing yourself before you jump in?
I do not mind doing that at all. In fact, I have an entire slide prepared. All
Fantastic.
right. So as promised, this is a slide with me introducing myself. I'm Ricardo Spagni. You may know me as Fluffypony. If you don't, I'm Fluffypony on Twitter. There's my GPG key signature thing. So today I'm going to talk about a super, not very controversial topic at all, which is supply auditability. And I'm going to really focus on three things. What is the issue? What are the options? And where does this leave us? So let's dive right in. For those that don't know, here's the issue. It's basically that Bitcoin is the gold standard. You can see the amounts being transacted, and everyone likes this. And you might ask yourself, why do they like this? The reason that they like this is because when they look at a privacy enhancing currency like Monero, they don't see the amounts because those amounts are hidden through various methods. And this, of course, has led to criticism that there's hidden inflation risk because you can't see the amounts, and that's bad because what you really want to be able to do is take out your calculator, your Texas Instruments TI 92 or whatever that famous one is, and you want to literally type in all the amounts from the blockchain and then go, this is the total number of Bitcoin in existence. Haha, it's great, I've audited the supply myself. But when you can't see the amounts, that's problematic, right? And I think that's a terrible baseline for auditability. And the reason I think it's a very bad baseline for auditability is for a number of reasons. The first is we rely on things all the time that we can't validate using our Texas Instruments calculator. I mean, we kind of could really hashing and key derivation. We could actually do that by hand, but let's be honest, no one's going to do that. We just trust the piece of code, or we trust the research, or we trust the implementation. And by and large, that's okay because a lot of the stuff is well researched. A lot of the cryptography used in Bitcoin, used in Monero, is stuff that's existed for a long time. It's well understood, even if it is more recent. Some of this cryptography goes back decades. And so even though you might not take out your fancy schmancy graphing calculator, you still know that in open source software like Monero and Bitcoin, there's a bunch of people who have actually taken out their graphing calculator and checked that. So cool, we trust them, and that's okay. And this is why I'm sort of saying I don't think that there's much value in saying I need to see it with my eyes. I need to see the numbers with my eyes, because that's like saying I can't trust the public key, my Bitcoin public key, unless I've whipped out my TI-84, TI-86, or TI-82. There's lots of arguments going on about which Texas Instruments calculator is the best. And I'm just, I'm going to figure out this derivation. And if I can't figure out the derivation myself, then I'm not going to trust it. No one does that. That's just crazy. You just trust that key derivation. You trust the hashing. You trust the encryption. You don't even give it a second thought. So if it's clear that we want soundness. Okay, we understand that we want security, we want monetary soundness, we understand all of that. So let's try and understand what are the trade-offs. Let's try and figure this out. So there are 3 problems that can arise when it comes to supply auditability. The first is we can have a cryptographic hardness assumption that breaks. The second is we can have detectable inflation due to some sort of implementation bug. The third thing is we can have undetectable inflation due to some sort of implementation bug. Okay, cool. Let's dig into these. So the first one is a cryptographic hardness assumption breaks. Now, the thing is with this, if a cryptographic hardness assumption breaks, let's say the discrete logarithm problem, that the assumption around that is broken, we actually have much bigger problems than, I can create infinite inflation with Monero. Literally everything is on fire and the world burns down. So that's probably not a great thing to happen. So I kind of feel there's, we might as well not bother worrying about it. It's not that there isn't risk. It's just that the risk is kind of negligible, right? Especially if you're using something or cryptography that is reasonably well established and has been around for a long time. If you're not relying on moon math, then you're pretty okay. And for the most part, when you're using WhatsApp and iMessage and Signal and Wire, when you're using Tor, when you're using Bitcoin, when you're using Monero, it's stuff that you can rely on because of the fact that there's a reasonable amount of research that's been done and history that exists around the cryptographic assumptions. Okay, cool. That one's easy. We've decided we're not going to worry about that because the risk is cryptographically negligible. Now, the second one, detectable inflation due to an implementation flaw. Now, this has happened in the past. It's a very real risk. It's happened twice on Bitcoin. It's happened once on Monero. It's happened on other currencies as well. Bitcoin had it happen 3 times. The first was a value overflow bug in 2010, and this led to the creation of 92 billion Bitcoin. The second was a double spend bug in 2018, and with Monero, there was a key image malleability bug in 2017. Now, let's sort of think about this, because these incidences have occurred. So what happened? Well, they were handled safely. Okay, so back in 2010, when there were these billions of Bitcoin that were created, they were soft forked out, no problem. The more recent double spend bug, it was detected and discreetly fixed before anyone could exploit it. Same with Monero's key image malleability bug. It was detected, it was discreetly fixed. But now here's the problem. What happens if it's not handled safely? So let's imagine that in these 3 instances, something happens and the funds are spent before detection. Well, this is an issue, right? Because there are no valid proposals for dealing with this. Either you burn the original coins, which means all those coins all those spends downstream get affected, or you fork the blockchain entirely, and that's a problem as well, because there might be people who've deposited stuff on exchanges, there might be people who've bought services. Now all of those transactions get unwound, and what are you going to do? Rely on the honesty and goodness of people to fix it? I mean, let's be real. Oh well, I accidentally have $1 million extra because of this blockchain issue. That's a real tough one to rely on the goodness of people, the honesty of people. So pretty much every proposal that anyone has ever pitched about how to deal with this is catastrophic. And it doesn't matter if it's on Bitcoin or on Monero, it's catastrophic. Okay, and so let's just think back to that. So think about not so much the 2010 Bitcoin issue, because that was kind of big and obnoxious, but think about the Bitcoin double spend bug that was that has the 2018 CVE. So now you've got this output that you've received as an attacker, and now you double spend it, and that double spend isn't detected because it's, for whatever reason, even though we can see the numbers with our own eyes, this is a double spend problem. Effectively, we're able to sort of almost legitimately double spend a TXO, and by the time it's actually picked up, and that might be pretty quickly, it could be within minutes even, by the time it's picked up, there's already too much that's happened on chain. An attacker could have spent someone else's funds. An attacker could have deposited to exchanges. There's all sorts of terrible things that could have happened, and undoing that is almost impossible. It's going to affect a bunch of people. And this is on Bitcoin. This isn't on Monero or something that typically gets criticism on or criticism about it. It could be on Bitcoin. It could have happened on Bitcoin already, but thankfully, we detected and fixed that bug before it happened. So the risk is small with detectable inflation, but it has to be fixed early. It has to be caught before it ends up getting exploited. Okay, and if it doesn't, well, it's like almost as bad as like a cryptographic hardness assumption breaking, except instead of like the world being on fire, like that currency's on fire, and you might as well throw it in the trash can, because coming out of that is super difficult. I would argue probably impossible. Okay. Third thing, undetectable inflation due to an implementation flaw. Now, this is a legitimate concern because this is the only class of attack of these three that exclusively affects privacy-enhancing currencies. It cannot affect Bitcoin because by its very nature, you can see the numbers on the blockchain and add it up on your calculator. Great. So is this a legitimate issue? Yes. And similarly, there are no good ways of handling this. There have been proposals like turnstiles. Turnstiles are utter garbage. They just give a game theoretic advantage to attackers because attackers can then, as you move money into the turnstile, they can move money out. And you can effectively create a sort of weird situation where an attacker is constantly bleeding money out, but there's not, out of some sort of pool or secret privacy pool, or clever little privacy pool. And as people go in, and you kind of have a situation where it's like a bank, it's like fractional reserve banking, in that pool. And when that turnstile eventually trips and there's no chance of getting money out, you could end up with a bunch of legitimate users who end up getting messed over. They're the ones who can now no longer pull their legitimate funds out of the magical pool of privacy. So turnstiles are garbage. All other proposals, of course, they're basically just the same issue. It's like, oh, when we eventually detected it, well, it's a problem. And of course, the worst part about it is that detecting it in that scenario might not be like, oh, we detected it on the blockchain. It might be we detected it because an exchange said they're receiving extraordinarily high deposits and it doesn't make sense. So this is the real trade-off. Okay, cool. Now, where does that leave us? All right. Both non-private and private currencies actually, if you think about it, face many of the same supply auditability risks. In fact, in some instances, they face exactly the same supply auditability risks, like the cryptographic hardness assumption. If you break that, that is a problem, whether you are a privacy-enhancing currency or not. Same goes for detectable inflation once it's already been abused. I mean, it's abused and it's like, oh, well, gosh, what are we going to do? It's a little bit too late then. And again, it doesn't actually matter if you have a privacy enhancing currency or a perfectly traceable currency. You've got a problem either way. Okay. And so in this situation, regardless of what happens, we can consider those outcomes to be devastating. And when we say devastating, we mean the likelihood of recovery from that is not great. And in fact, if you consider something like Bitcoin, which is so dominant and has so much mindshare, if Bitcoin's monetary soundness had to be broken, like almost happened recently with that double spend issue, if someone had abused it and we ended up with these coins created out of thin air, which might have been a large number of coins, then that could have taken down the entire ecosystem. There might be no coming back for any of us. So it's really this is a legitimate risk. And I think it's a risk that is maybe not very understood, or at least not thought about or discussed when it comes to cryptocurrencies. Okay, cool. So we've got this actual trade-off, right? Which is that a privacy enhancing currency has the risk of undetectable inflation, but it gives you powerful privacy. On the other side, or on the other hand, you have a non-private currency, which actually doesn't come with guarantees for supply auditability, but it does have this cool thing where you can pull out your Texas Instruments calculator and add up numbers on the block explorer. but it makes privacy much harder to achieve. In fact, in some instances, nearly impossible. And so this is kind of like, if you look at those two trade-offs, like that's obviously, you have to choose which trade-off you prefer. And you need to understand as well that on both sides, there are improvements that are possible. For example, a non-private cryptocurrency like Bitcoin might give you sufficient privacy through level or layer 2 systems like Lightning. There's also work being done to improve things like CoinJoin and through stuff like Taproot and Schnorr. And so maybe we end up with sufficient privacy, and we also get the I can add up numbers on my calculator supply auditability, which some people seem to think is magical. On the other hand, a private currency might dramatically reduce the implementation risk. So as an example of this, Monero hides its amounts, and stuff like Grin does this as well, and Tari hides its amounts by using something called Peterson commitments. Now, Peterson commitments are special because it's kind of like you're committing to the value without revealing the value. Okay, so it's like this very cool, zero knowledge thing. And because we had the ZKP Privacy Summit, I have to make sure that I throw in like a zero knowledge thing. Cool. And the thing with Peterson commitments is that they are perfectly hiding but computationally binding. And what that means is that they do a very good job of hiding the amount, and they do a reasonably good job of making sure that the amount is what it says on the tin, or is what we're committing to. Now, the flip side to this, or the sort of inverse of this, the didactic opposite of this, is Algomel commitments, and they are computationally hiding but perfectly binding. And so they do this fantastic job of well, whatever the value is that we committed to, you're not breaking that. It's like perfectly binding, 100%. This is amazing. But of course, the actual hiding bit is computationally hiding, so it might be broken one day by a sufficiently powerful computer, and you might be able to figure out the amounts. And of course, Monero or Grin or Tari or any Mimblewimble implementation, or Liquid, which also uses confidential transactions, all of these things could switch from Peterson commitments to Algomel commitments, and they would improve the supply auditability quality. Now, it's important to understand that there are reasons for this not having been done right now, and that is because Algomel commitments are just massive and really, really big and really slow by comparison. And of course, you don't get the magic that Bulletproofs provides, which is that you can do all sorts of cool zero-knowledge circuitry stuff with it, and it's much smaller and more compact and much faster to verify, and there's all sorts of really cool tricks that you can do with Bulletproofs to make it even faster. And you can't do that with Algomel commitments. And that's not to say that there won't be improvements with Algomel commitments in the future, but as it stands right now, it's too chunky. But you can imagine a scenario where in 5 or 10 years' time, maybe instead of 5G, we're running 10G on our iPhone 27s, and we're all running fiber to the home and fiber to the Waffle House and whatever. And maybe in that scenario where latency is dropped, and so you can move a lot more data around on the internet a lot faster, then it might make sense for something like this to work and to operate without sufficiently putting a damper on decentralization. And of course, this can be done today. I mean, you can actually go and make that switch today. And in fact, Grin has built something in called a switch commitment, where they are able to make that switch in future quite easily. So this is something that's quite nice, because it provides this added boost to supply auditability in the future. Cool. So I think it's important to understand that everything has unavoidable trade-offs. And oftentimes we tend to ignore the trade-offs, or we tend to go no, I need to have the ability to look at the blockchain explorer and add the numbers on my calculator. And without that, everything is a scam and rubbish. And of course, that's not true, because as pointed out, even with that ability, you can still end up with supply auditability issues. And so it's not as simple as saying I need to be able to see the numbers. It's more complex than that. It's more nuanced than that. And I think it's important that individuals look at this and they choose the set of trade-offs that make the most sense. You might need that improved privacy, and you're willing to accept that there is this risk, and it's small, but it is non-negligible, that there might be hidden inflation, that everything might implode. Just like you might choose, like I don't care about privacy that much. I shower with my shower curtain open and the webcam on, and in that case, you might say like, I accept the small, non-negligible risk that there is inflation that gets exploited, and destroys like the entire fabric of time and space, or at least destroys the currency that I'm using. And so it's important to evaluate those risks, understand them, and of course keep up to date with future improvements, because this situation might change in future. There might be a privacy enhancing technology in the future that really improves on this in a substantial way, or there might be improvements to Bitcoin that improve on privacy in a substantial enough way, while still retaining a lot of the nice supply auditability stuff that people like. And I think it's important as well at this point to point out that this isn't about Bitcoin versus Monero. I've had some comments on this topic before where people think that this is somehow like Bitcoin versus Monero, or like Bitcoin versus versus some other private currency or privacy enhancing currency, and it's not that at all. This is actually about Bitcoin versus Bitcoin. And what I mean there is, recently I've heard a lot of arguments about Bitcoin not improving privacy, and a lot of the times those arguments go something along the lines of, if we add privacy to Bitcoin, then regulators won't like it, or this one in particular, if we add privacy to Bitcoin, then there will be a supply auditability problem. And my argument is, you've got the supply auditability problem anyway. This might add an extra dimension to it, but you already have the supply auditability problem. So just kind of accept that the supply auditability problem exists. There's no good way of handling it. Turnstiles are garbage. They don't work. And so, and if it is exploited, like, you're in deep water anyway. And so choose the thing that is best for you. In this case, for Bitcoin, I would say adding privacy is best for everyone. So that's really all I wanted to cover. I thank you for your time. Feel free to continue this debate on Twitter, where you can scream at me and I can tell you how your opinion is incorrect. Go and watch this talk again.
Cool. This was a really awesome talk. Are there any questions that you want to answer?
I mean, if people want to ask questions, they're welcome to.
All right. So I see one question. I see one question in the chat. Why non-private have supply auditability risk? Values are values are public.
I feel like I covered that.
I know. I feel like you covered it.
Yeah, I think I do think that there are some people who started watching a little bit into it, and it's probably a good idea for them to go watch from the beginning, so that they can understand, specifically why traceable currencies also have supply auditability risks.
Yes. Do you have any resources that you would recommend people check out to learn more about financial privacy?
Yeah, I mean, like, for financial privacy, there's the R privacy subreddit that has opinions, and their opinions are also very, by the way, largely focused on actual privacy and day-to-day use. So they do cover things like cash, privacy.com, credit cards, like one single usage credit cards if you're in the US, and lots of other things. I think, we tend to get into a big discussion about like which privacy enhancing currency is the best, but at the end of the day, even if you're using, let's imagine that like Monero, or let's imagine there's some new coin, we'll call it zero knowledge magical coin. Let's say that you are using zero knowledge magical coin and it is perfectly private in every possible way, and you go and make a transaction and then post about that transaction on Facebook, you lose all privacy. It doesn't matter that the thing is magical and provided you with magical privacy. You've gone and wrecked it. So I think people sometimes forget that privacy often is more about OPSEC, about your operational security, about the way you manage everything and compartmentalize this data, and not about one specific technology you're using. There is no magic bullet.
Okay. Someone wants to know, do you know of papers, discussions specifically on game theoretic issues with turnstiles, racing against hodlers and lost keys, etc.?
I don't think that there's been anything that's been written up on it yet. Like at least nothing that I've read that's sort of like really expounded on it. And I think it's because the turnstile stuff is largely, I mean, it's kind of obvious what could happen with a turnstile, and how you could end up being like a hodler who, like, you're the last to move your coins, and so, sorry for you. And I think that it's, I mean, sure, I'd welcome some decent research on it to sort of prove that point, but it's somewhat intuitively obvious.
Okay. Someone wants to know, can you explain why turnstile methods are trash?
Yeah, so I think like the best way to think of it, right, is if you imagine like an actual turnstile going in and out of a subway, and you can imagine like an attacker that is within the subway station able to generate more people out of thin air. And then all he does is he watches, and when someone walks into the subway station, he takes one of his magically created robots and they exit. At some point in time, you're going to you still can have legitimate people like exiting as well. He just like watches and goes, oh, okay, well, this person's running towards the turnstile, we'll let them through. And at some point, he's going to end up with like all of his magically created people on the outside, and there are going to be a bunch of legitimate people stuck in the subway station that aren't able to exit. And that's really the issue, is that it doesn't solve the problem. It just sort of like creates what I like to think of as supply auditability theater. It like seems to solve the problem. Hey, look, we've got this thing, and when it gets tripped up, well, then that's it closes. But the problem is it closes and can and will damage legitimate holders if there's an actual exploit. So that's in the absence of the exploit, it's great. This is fantastic. But if there is an exploit, you've got an issue.
Okay, perfect. Someone wants to know a bit more about Tari.
Sure. Tari is a decentralized assets protocol. It uses Mimblewimble on the base layer and builds on top of that, and it's merge mined with Monero, so it's sort of architected as this merge mined sidechain with Monero as a way to sort of make this cool thing built on the side of Monero.
So, question. I've heard Mimblewimble isn't very effective. Has that been fixed? Is that true? False?
Isn't very effective from a privacy or a scalability perspective?
Privacy.
Okay, cool. Yes, so that's very true. So from a scalability perspective, Mimblewimble is excellent, which is why Tari chose to build on it. From a privacy perspective, it's got some good points. There's a lot of cool stuff that it does, which is great for privacy, like having confidential transactions baked into it, and doing transaction cut through as well, which is also good for privacy. It's not perfect, and it's not trying to be, at least like right now, it seems to me that a lot of the research isn't focused on massive improvements to Mimblewimble privacy, especially because there's interactivity required with transactions and that sort of thing. Although even there's work that's been done on non-interactive Mimblewimble transactions. And I think that it's not like perfect for things like let's create a privacy, like super privacy focused currency, but for something like Tari that allows people, or will allow people, to switch back into Monero if they have like strong privacy needs, and then they can come back into Tari whenever they have like these more sort of decentralized assets transactional needs. I think it lends itself towards that very much.
Okay, very cool. So for tokenizing digital assets, will you guys need like security token platforms or like on and off ramps for that later on?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's I'm sort of I have a big interest in security tokens. I think that there's a lot of cool things that can be done with security tokens, especially around like new types of organizations, not DAOs. I mean, like actual organizations, like registered entities, and that comply with legislation, but still have this really cool sort of, way of issuing shares and of maybe even handling shareholder voting and that sort of thing. So I think that security tokens are of interest to me, to Tari as a community. And yeah, I mean, like, as and when the time comes around, there definitely should be some discussion about with those organizations. I'd love to see them like adding support for Tari security tokens, or for security tokens issued on Tari.
Very cool. Last question. How can view keys be used to comply with FATF travel rule?
So there's a really good paper that we commissioned Perkins Coie to write on how organizations, exchanges, service providers, whatever, can comply with regulation while still dealing with privacy enhancing currencies, and that goes into a great amount of detail about how there's actually, you know, these privacy enhancing currencies like Monero, like CoinJoin on Bitcoin, like Lightning, like Zcash, are already compliant with all this regulation, including the travel rule. And it goes into a great amount of detail about how, like, there's no additional functionality that's needed. You don't need to build all sorts of weird travel rule compliance onto the blockchain. And it's really a fantastic read. It, of course, is quite sort of law heavy, and given that it's produced by primarily by Perkins Coie with a bunch of collaborators. But I strongly suggest, like, I think, you know, I've tweeted about it, the Monero account's tweeted about it. It's on the Perkins Coie website, not that hard to find, and it's worth reading. It's a great white paper that really dives deep into those regulatory issues and how it's not that difficult to be compliant.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, this is really great. So we are out of time. We need to transition to our next talk. We really appreciate you taking the time. It was great.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye. Thank